Act 1, Scene 3, and we're back to the witches. So we're back to where they were before, near the battlefield, and they appear back onto the stage. One starts talking about what she's been up to, and she talks about the fact she's been killing swine. And another describes the revenge that she's planned upon a sailor whose wife refused to share her chestnuts with her. And the purpose of this interaction here is to show how mischievous and malevolent the witches are and the supernatural elements of the play is. It's to show the chaos that they bring to the natural world. And then the drum comes in, and the third witch says, Macbeth is coming, and Macbeth and Banquo arrive and meet with the witches. Banquo's reaction is quite an interesting one. He points out they don't seem to be the inhabitants of the earth and that they're withered and wild in their appearance. He wonders if they're really women, since they seem to have beards. However, as quickly as he's giving those kind of descriptions of the witches, they begin to speak, and they chant to Macbeth, "Hail Macbeth, Thane of Glamis, hail Macbeth, Thane of Cawdor, hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter." And Macbeth is rightly quite confused by this greeting, because he knows that he's the Thane of Glamis, but he has no knowledge of what has happened and the fact that Duncan has decreed that he will become the Thane of Cawdor, and he certainly doesn't understand how he's going to be king. But as quickly as he tries to get more information out of them, they turn their attention to Banquo, speaking in yet more riddles. They tell Banquo that he's going to be happier than Macbeth, but not so happy, that he'll be lesser than Macbeth, but greater, and that he's not going to be king himself, but his children will be kings. And that's really important, because that is something that Macbeth then goes on to fixate on as the play progresses. As Banquo and Macbeth are then discussing what they've just seen and what they've heard, their conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Ross and Angus, who are two lesser thanes, but they've come from the king to tell Macbeth that he has been made the Thane of Cawdor. And Macbeth at this point is mind blown, because he's just heard the witches say that he's going to be the Thane of Cawdor, and then seemingly it comes true almost instantaneously. Banquo's more concerned about this than Macbeth is. He worries that the devils tell half-truths in order to win us to our harm, that this is going to tempt Macbeth into doing something, or tempt humanity into doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Macbeth tells him not to worry, but at a later point they are going to speak about what has happened. Looking a little bit more closely at the text, and you can see some of these ideas that the witches are bringing through here. If we have perhaps a slightly more closer look at this section here, where the witches are talking about creating a storm. And it's really important at this point to think about the context. James I, who was the Scottish king who on Elizabeth I's death succeeded the English throne, he believed that his boat, when he was sailing, was brought down by a storm created by witches, and this provoked a series of witch trials. And Shakespeare is drawing on that fear, that Jacobean fear, that witches controlled the weather. So as the witches are talking about giving each other wind, so second witch, I'll give thee a wind, and I another, and I myself of all the other, and the very ports they blow, all the quarters that they know, in the shipman's card, I'll drain him dry as hay. That's playing on this fear that the witches cause storms. And certainly Shakespeare draws on this by having the witches appear in stormy weather, in thunder and lightning, and they talk about how they're creating storms to deliberately shipwreck boats. So there's a link there to preying on the fears of that Jacobean audience. But as quickly as they've been talking about this chaos, they announce the arrival with the lines, a drum, Macbeth doth come. And there's something very ominous about that singular monosyllabic sentence, a drum, Macbeth obviously being polysyllabic, but a drum, Macbeth doth come. There's something quite sinister about the way that sounds, and it rolls off the tongue. It's almost onomatopoeic in the way that it sounds, and it just adds to that sense of supernatural anxiety and tension that we have here. The first lines that Macbeth speaks in this play are so foul and fair a day I have not seen. Straight away, Shakespeare has given him the same vocabulary that the witches speak. So when he comes along and he says, so foul and fair a day I have not seen, it echoes the witches' language where they say, fair is foul and foul is fair, giving that link immediately between Macbeth and the supernatural. Banquo then goes on and sees the witches and starts to describe them as withered and wild. They don't look like the inhabitants of the earth. They've got chappy fingers, skinny lips, beards. They are unnatural in their appearance, and he's wary of them because of this. He can't reconcile how they exist on our earth when he's never seen anything like them before. And then they start speaking and they give the prophecies. They say to Macbeth, all hail Thane of Glamis, all hail Thane of Cawdor, all hail thou shalt be king hereafter. And Macbeth is quite taken aback by this. Banquo notices that he seems to start and seem to fear, as in he jumps and he reacts in a frightened manner with what they're saying. And Banquo says, why are you doing that when they seem so good? They're saying things that seem so fair. But then he keeps continuing questioning. He says, they seem to be fantastical. If you can tell the future, speak of me. Tell me what is going to happen. And they speak in riddles. They speak in an ambiguous manner. They say that he's going to be lesser than Macbeth, but greater, happy, but not so happy. He's not going to be a king, but he will have kings. And that ambiguity is really important because it shows us how the characters then are going to interact with this information. Macbeth is really taken aback by it, and Banquo wonders about how this is going to transpire as the play progresses. It's really important at this point to notice that both of the men are there together on stage and they both hear these prophecies, because it's going to drive them apart. It's going to drive this action where Banquo starts suspecting Macbeth, and Macbeth is worried because Banquo knows what has been told to him. At this point, Macbeth is determined to know more. He calls them imperfect speakers, drawing attention to the riddles they seem to be speaking in. But he understands that he's already Thane of Glamis because the previous Thane of Glamis, Cynal, has already passed away. But he doesn't understand how he can be the Thane of Cawdor. He says the Thane of Cawdor lives. He's a prosperous gentleman. So how can it possibly be true that I'm the Thane of Cawdor? How do you know this? Speak, tell me what you're saying. And the witches vanish. They refuse to stay and to answer any of the questions. And Banquo's response say, the earth hath bubbles as the water has, and these are of them. Thinking about where, the witches are rising up from there. They're rising up from underneath the water, underneath the earth's crust. He understands they are as he goes on to later say, the instruments of darkness. They are the advocates of the devil. Macbeth wishes that they had stayed. But Banquo is still questioning. He says, were they here, or have we eaten on the insane route? He's questioning his sanity. He thinks, have I eaten something funny that's making me hallucinate? Am I losing my mind? But Macbeth's response is really interesting. He immediately goes to the part of the prophecy given to Banquo, which is, your children shall be kings. And for me, this is quite a poignant moment in the play because it draws attention to the fact that Macbeth doesn't have any children. And this is an idea that we come back later onto in Act 3, where he talks about how everything that he's done is for nothing. If he doesn't have anybody who can inherit the throne, kind of what's the point in having done it all? But he's very fixated on this idea that Banquo's children will be king. It's the first thing that he says to Banquo after the witches have gone. And this is a moment in the play that is so important because Banquo's children are now a threat to Macbeth's throne. Almost immediately, as Banquo and Macbeth have been discussing this, Ross and Angus appear. Remember, they've been sent from the king to come and give Macbeth the news that he's going to be made the Thane of Cawdor. And this is exactly what happens. Ross says, as you can see highlighted in green, he bade me from him call thee Thane of Cawdor. He delivers the news that Duncan has instated Macbeth as the Thane of Cawdor because the previous Thane of Cawdor has been tried and found guilty of treason and is therefore being executed. Banquo is quite panicked by this. The highlighted yellow here, you can see, he says, what, can the devil speak true? because the prophecies the witches have just given are that obviously Macbeth is going to be the Thane of Cawdor, and Banquo is quite startled by this. Macbeth is slightly more cautious at this point, and he says, "The Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" A really important image for later on, this idea of borrowed robes, the idea that he doesn't deserve this title and that you can't just take the title from somebody, you have to have earned it. So this is quite foreboding in the sense that Macbeth is never going to be the rightful king. He's not earned that by right. And Angus goes on and explains that yes, the Thane of Cawdor currently is still alive, but he has been tried for treason. He is about to be executed. And Macbeth realizes that he's now the Thane of Glamis and the Thane of Cawdor, and he says the greatest is behind, as in his kingship is going to follow. We see in this section Banquo's anxiety around what has just happened. He says to Macbeth, "Oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths." So he's concerned that this evil information that they've received is going to tempt Macbeth now into doing something that he's going to later regret. It forebodes the action that is going to come. Macbeth is also quite concerned by this, and we see his first moral dilemma here, where he says, "It cannot be ill, cannot be good." He understands that this is a bit of a paradox, because this information that he's been given, it can't be foul, because these things are positive for him. He's getting power, he's getting recognition, he's getting a title, he's getting land. But it can't be good because it's frightening him. He says, if it's given me, it's making my seated heart knock at my ribs. It's frightening me. I'm imagining horrible things. And so he's kind of having this debate amongst himself. And he settles on this idea highlighted in yellow on the right-hand side. So just highlighted here. "If chance will have me king, why chance might crown me without my stir?" So he's settled within himself that he's going to leave it up to fate. He's going to leave it up to things coming true in their own time. If fate will have me king, well, let fate get on with it. I'm not going to do anything about this. And Banquo chiddies him along. He says, "Come on, we're waiting for you. We need to go and see the king. We've been summoned. Off we go." Your revision tasks for this scene then. Again, we'll stick with the draw it, imagine it, write it, analyse it. Draw it. Create a pictogram, feature it with Beth and Banquo meeting the witches, surround it with your quotations. Make sure you've got that key information out of the scene. Imagine it. If you are a creative person, how would you direct the scene? Where would you place the characters on stage and why? Where would you have the witches? Where would you have Banquo and Macbeth? How would you have them interact with each other? What would you tell those actors to do? How would you have Macbeth and Banquo reacting to what they're hearing? Or maybe you want to write it. Again, if you're more creative, imagine you are Macbeth or Banquo and write that monologue capturing the events and how you felt about them. Write Macbeth's private diary, write Banquo's private diary, thinking about what it is that they've seen. Or maybe you want to analyse it, create that mini essay again. How does Shakespeare present Banquo and Macbeth's feelings about the supernatural in the scene? What language tells us how they're feeling at this point in the play? Whatever you do with it, make sure that you've got the key information and you've got the key ideas, because this is a crucial scene.